My name is Walter Whitmore, and at 63 years old I am a man who has learned that the quietest people often have the most to say. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Some might look at my silver hair and think I'm past my prime, a relic of a bygone era, but they would be mistaken. Age hasn't softened me. It has honed me, sharpened my senses, and clarified my purpose. My late wife, Eleanor, always said I had a core of steel beneath my gentlemanly demeanor. She saw the man I was, not just the image I presented to the world, a world that had always labeled me as handsome, dignified. It was on the occasion of my 70th birthday, a milestone that should have been marked by warmth and affection, that the polished veneer of my life was shattered. Yes, you heard correctly. It was at my own birthday party that the ground shifted beneath my feet. Eleanor, my beloved wife of 35 years, had been gone for only 3 months, leaving an emptiness in our home that felt like a physical presence. The grand house, once filled with love and laughter, now echoed with a chilling silence. My daughter, Grace, at 36, lived there with me, along with her husband, Leo. She had always been gentle-natured, perhaps to a fault, as pliable as soft clay in the hands of a more forceful personality. And Leo, at 34, was certainly forceful. He was handsome in a manufactured sort of way, with a swagger that spoke of a man who had married into wealth he hadn't lifted a finger to earn. The arrogance he possessed was a particular kind, one that festers in those who believe they are entitled to the fruits of another's labor. It was I who had to arrange my own 70th birthday dinner. Can you fathom the quiet indignity of planning your own celebration because your own family is too preoccupied to bother? I chose to wear my favorite navy blazer, the one Eleanor always complimented, saying it brought out the color of my eyes. I wanted to project an aura of dignity, a shield against the profound loneliness that had taken root in my heart. The dining room was impeccably set with the Whitmore family china, a legacy passed down through 4 generations. The first sign of the storm to come was subtle yet jarring. Leo had taken it upon himself to sit at the head of the table, in the very seat that had always been mine. Grace said nothing, her gaze fixed on her dinner plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. "So, Walter," Leo began, his voice slicing through the quiet tension as he attacked his filet mignon with a needlessly aggressive flourish. "Grace and I have been doing some thinking." I calmly dabbed my lips with a crisp linen napkin, my expression a carefully constructed mask of composure. Decades with Eleanor, a woman whose moods could shift as quickly as the weather, had taught me the art of facial control. "Oh?" I inquired, my tone even. "Well, you see," he continued, a smug little smile playing on his lips, "we believe it's time for you to start considering alternative living arrangements." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, a cascade of ice-cold water down my spine. Yet I held my face in neutral. "Alternative arrangements?" Grace finally lifted her eyes from her plate, her chin quivering with a weakness that pained me to see. "Dad, what Leo is trying to say is, I am perfectly capable of speaking for myself, Grace." Leo snapped, his sharp tone making her flinch. He turned back to me, his smile returning, plastic and insincere. "This house, Walter, it's simply too large for a man of your years. All these stairs, the constant upkeep. We were thinking you'd be far more comfortable in one of those delightful senior living communities." I placed my fork down on the china with deliberate, measured precision. "This is certainly interesting timing, Leo. To bring this up on my birthday, in my own home, while eating a meal that I provided." A flicker of irritation flashed in his eyes. "Asterisk your time's home? I believe you're a bit confused, Walter. This is Grace's inheritance now. This is our time's family home." "Dad," Grace mumbled, a weak protest lost in the charged atmosphere. Perhaps we should discuss this another time. No, Leo declared, cutting her off without a second thought. We've been more than patient, more than generous, in fact. But to be perfectly frank, Walter, you're becoming a burden. The word hung in the air, ugly and suffocating. Grace and I want to start a family of our own, and we require our space. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute, so profound that I could hear the stately ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick marking the final seconds of their comfortable, self-serving delusion. A burden, I repeated, my voice a soft murmur that barely disturbed the quiet. Well, yes. I mean, just look at the situation. You don't have a job. You make no financial contribution to the running of this household. And frankly, your constant presence, it's stifling. Leo's confidence swelled, like a predator sensing weakness. We think it's high time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Maybe find a little part-time job, something at a bookstore or a garden center, something appropriate for your age. Grace nodded beside him, her head bobbing in agreement, like a puppet on a string. It's true, Dad. You are, well, you're kind of a pest. Those words, uttered by my own daughter, the child I had held in my arms, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose heartbreaks I had mended, whose college education I had funded, whose wedding I had paid for, and whose considerable debts I had quietly settled on 3 separate occasions. Those words were the ones that truly broke something inside me. Slowly, with deliberate grace, I rose from my chair. I see. Oh, wonderful. Leo clapped his hands together, his delight as jarring as a child's at a funeral. I'm so relieved you're being rational about this. We've even taken the liberty of finding a lovely little apartment for you. It's in a more modest neighborhood, of course, something better suited to your budget. My budget? A smile touched my lips, but it was a cold, desolate thing that never reached my eyes. And what budget precisely would that be? Well, whatever Eleanor left you, of course. It couldn't have been much. She was a smart woman. She would have left the real assets to her daughter. I turned and walked to the large bay window, my gaze falling upon the meticulously manicured gardens. I saw the stone fountain Eleanor and I had chosen for our 20th anniversary, and the rose bushes I had cultivated for decades. You know, Leo, I said, my back still to them, you are absolutely correct about one thing. Oh? He sounded positively gleeful. It is indeed time for some significant changes around here. I turned to face them, and I saw Grace physically recoil from the expression on my face. But I'm afraid you have made one critical miscalculation. And what's that? Leo's smug smile remained, his confidence unshaken. You assumed I was powerless? I said, my voice low and steady. You assumed I was just some feeble old man you could shuffle off to a home when I became inconvenient. You mistook my quiet grief for weakness. My heels clicked decisively on the polished hardwood floor as I walked back towards the table. But most of all, you assumed you knew the contents of Eleanor's will. The color began to seep from Leo's face, leaving behind a pasty mask of uncertainty. What are you talking about? I'm talking about, my dear son-in-law, the fact that we have an appointment tomorrow morning with Miss Harrison, Eleanor's attorney, and at that meeting you will learn exactly what your wife has inherited. Grace finally found her voice, a panicked tremor in it. Dad, what is this? Mom left everything to me, the house, the company, the investments, did she? I picked up my coat from the back of my chair and headed for the foyer. Well, I suppose we'll have our answer tomorrow, won't we? Where are you going? Leo's voice had shed its condescending tone, replaced now by a sharp edge of alarm. To pack a bag, I replied calmly. After all, you did ask me to leave. I paused in the grand archway of the dining room and looked back at them. My daughter, who had chosen a cruel and grasping man over her own father, and the man who had just orchestrated the single greatest mistake of his life. Oh, and Leo, I added, a final thought striking me. I suggest you enjoy this house tonight. Truly savor every moment, because after our meeting tomorrow, things are going to be very, very different around here. I left them sitting in a state of stunned, shocked silence, and as I ascended the magnificent curved staircase to pack a few essentials, a feeling I hadn't experienced since before Eleanor's passing surged through me. It was the electrifying sensation of being truly, vibrantly alive. You see, what they didn't know, what they had never cared enough to discover, was that Eleanor had amended her will 6 months before she passed away. She had seen the way Leo treated me, had watched with growing disappointment as her daughter became a weaker, crueler version of herself under his influence. And Eleanor, for all her complexities, was a woman who valued loyalty above all else. As I carefully folded my shirts into a suitcase, my thoughts turned to my old friend Matthew, who had graciously offered me the use of his guest house. Matthew Turner, who also happened to be a retired attorney with a formidable expertise in estate law. Matthew, who had been the one to help Eleanor draft that final, definitive will and testament. A slow smile spread across my face as I placed my travel case in the suitcase, my fingers brushing against the fine leather wallet Eleanor had given me for our 25th anniversary. Tomorrow, Leo was going to receive a harsh lesson. Some battles are won not with loud aggression and theatrical drama, but with quiet patience and strategic foresight. Some people believe that at my age, you are meant to recede into the background, to gracefully accept whatever morsels of dignity are tossed your way. But I had a message for anyone who thought Walter Whitmore was going to go gentle into that good night. I was just getting started. That night I found sanctuary in Matthew's guest house, a charming cottage nestled behind his main residence. Matthew Turner had been my closest friend since our university days. Unlike me, he had never married, choosing instead to pour his energy into building a highly successful law practice. He had retired at 60 with a fortune sufficient for world travel and a mind sharp enough to identify trouble from a mile away. Tea? He offered, his voice a comforting balm as I sat in his cozy living room, the evening's ugly events replaying in my mind. Please, I managed. I watched him move about the kitchen with a practiced efficiency, the hallmark of a man who had spent a lifetime managing crises. Matthew, I need to talk to you about Eleanor's will. He handed me a cup of fine porcelain, his intelligent brown eyes filled with concern. What specifically do you need to know, Walter? Everything. Matthew settled into the armchair across from me, crossing his legs in that neat, precise way he always did. Eleanor left everything to you, my friend. Absolutely everything. The house, the business, the entire investment portfolio, the life insurance policies, the vacation homes in Vale and Martha's Vineyard, all of it. I took a sip of the hot tea, its warmth a small comfort against the chill that had settled deep within me. What is the exact figure? $33 million, give or take, in liquid assets and securities. The properties are valued at another $12 million. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Walter, what happened tonight? I recounted the entire sordid affair. Every cruel and dismissive word, every gesture of disrespect, every ounce of humiliation they had piled upon me at my own birthday dinner. With each detail I shared, Matthew's expression grew colder, harder. They actually called you a burden? He asked when I had finished, his voice laced with disbelief. Among other things. And Grace? She just sat there? She called me a pest, I said, the words still. A fresh, stinging wound. Matthew was silent for a long moment, his legal mind whirring. Walter, I was there when Eleanor drafted that will. Do you have any idea why she decided to leave everything to you? I assumed it was because we were married for 35 years. No. He set his teacup down with a sharp, decisive clink. It was because 6 months before she died, she came to my office in a state of absolute fury. She had overheard Leo on the telephone with his mother, and they were laughing about how the old man would be out on the street the moment Eleanor was gone. She heard him call you pathetic. She heard him say you were too foolish to manage money, and that he couldn't wait to redecorate his Times house. The sense of betrayal was a sharp physical pain, far deeper than I could have imagined. She never told me. She didn't want to cause you more distress while you were so devoted to caring for her during her illness. But she made damn sure they would never see a single penny of her money. Matthew's smile was as sharp as a scalpel. She also had me include a very specific clause. If anyone contests the will, they permanently forfeit any and all right to an inheritance. A slow, cold smile began to form on my face. So if they dare to challenge it, they get nothing at all. Not even the token amounts she left them. Token amounts? Grace is to receive $5,000 and Eleanor's collection of antique watches. Leo, not being blood-related, receives nothing. Matthew's eyes gleamed with a strategist's fire. But if they contest, Grace loses the $5,000 and the watches. We sat in a comfortable silence, sipping our tea, our minds moving in concert. This was no longer about family. It was about planning. Not for reconciliation or harmony, but for the methodical and complete dismantling of the comfortable lives of two people who had so grievously underestimated me. Matthew, I said finally, my voice steady and resolved. I'm going to need your help. Of course. What do you need? Everything, I replied, meeting his gaze. Legal counsel, strategic advice, and someone to watch my back. Because what I intend to do to them may not be illegal, but it is going to be thorough. How thorough? I thought of Leo's smug, confident smirk, of Grace's weak, compliant nod as he called me a pest. I thought of how they had attempted to discard me like a piece of worn-out furniture, completely and utterly thorough. The following morning broke clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my life. I dressed with meticulous care for the will reading, selecting a classic black suit and my pearl tie pin, my expression a carefully neutral mask. I met Matthew at the downtown offices of Harrison, Price, and Associates, where Eleanor's attorney had scheduled the meeting for all family members. The office was the epitome of old money taste, supple leather armchairs, rich mahogany paneling, and shelves lined with law books that looked as though they were actually read. Miss Harrison was a distinguished woman in her 70s, with silver hair coiffed perfectly, and the calm, steady demeanor of someone who has spent a lifetime delivering both wonderful and terrible news with the same unflappable professionalism. Grace and Leo arrived 15 minutes late, and I could practically smell Leo's triumphant excitement from across the conference room. He had dressed for a coronation, wearing a flashy suit that was a size too small, and jewelry that was ostentatiously expensive. Grace looked anxious, but Leo looked like a man on the verge of inheriting a kingdom. "Thank you all for being here," Miss Harrison began, adjusting her spectacles. "I understand. This is a trying time for the family." "Oh, we're managing," Leo interjected with a display of false sympathy, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a condescending gesture. "Poor Walter has been so lost without Eleanor. But he needn't worry. We'll take good care of everything from now on." I offered a sweet, small smile and remained silent. Sometimes, the most powerful statement is no statement at all. Miss Harrison cleared her throat and began to read from the document. The legalese was dense and complex, but my focus was entirely on Leo's face as the reality of his situation slowly began to penetrate his thick skull. His expression shifted from confusion to concern, and then, finally, to full-blown panic. "I'm sorry," he interrupted abruptly when Miss Harrison reached the section pertaining to the primary residence. "Did I hear you correctly? Did you say the property is bequeathed to Walter?" "That is correct. The family residence, along with all associated properties, investments, and assets, are bequeathed to Mr. Walter Whitmore. But what about Grace? She's the daughter. Surely Grace receives $5,000 and her mother's collection of watches." The silence that filled the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could almost hear the sound of Leo's golden dreams shattering into a million pieces. "There has to be a mistake," Grace finally stammered, her face ashen. "My mother promised me." "I assure you there is no mistake," Miss Harrison stated gently but firmly. "The will is unequivocally clear. Mr. Whitmore inherits the entirety of the estate." Leo shot to his feet so quickly that his chair toppled backward with a loud crash. "This is preposterous. He's just a retired professor. He has no idea how to manage that kind of money." "The decedent's wishes were extremely specific," Miss Harrison continued, unperturbed by his outburst. "She also included a provision that any attempt to contest this will shall result in the immediate forfeiture of all bequests." "You can't be serious," Leo shrieked. "Grace, say something." But Grace just sat there, her gaze fixed on her hands, the full weight of her betrayal finally crashing down upon her. I stood up gracefully, smoothing the front of my suit jacket. "Thank you, Miss Harrison. I presume the necessary documents will be ready for my signature this afternoon." "Of course, Mr. Whitmore." I turned to face my daughter and her husband. "Well, this has certainly been an illuminating morning. I suppose I should be heading home now." I paused for effect. "Oh, and speaking of home, I suppose it's time for you two to start looking for a new place to live. You can't just throw us out," Leo screamed, his face a mottled shade of red. "We have rights." "Actually," Matthew spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative, "you don't. The house now belongs entirely to Walter. Legally speaking, you are trespassing." I gathered my briefcase and walked toward the door. "You have until tomorrow evening to remove your personal belongings. After that time, I will be having the locks changed." "Dad," Grace called out, her voice raw with desperation, "please, we can work this out. We're family." I paused at the door, my hand on the cool brass handle. "Family?" I looked back at the woman who had once been my precious little girl. "Yesterday, you called me a pest. Today, you want to be family?" I shook my head slowly. "I'm afraid, Grace, that it simply doesn't work that way." As I walked out of that office, leaving their shocked faces and desperate pleas behind me, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. But this was only the beginning. What they had done to me at that dinner, the humiliation, the cruelty, the utter dismissal of my worth, demanded a response far more comprehensive than a simple eviction. I now had $45 million, a brilliant legal mind as my best friend, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Let the games begin. I stood in the master bedroom of my Times home, and surveyed the carnage Leo had wrought. He had insisted on redecorating shortly after Eleanor's funeral, ruthlessly replacing our tasteful, cherished antiques with garish modern pieces that screamed new money and a desperate lack of taste. Gaudy crystal chandeliers that would have been more at home in a Las Vegas casino Stark white leather furniture that looked like it belonged in a sterile showroom, and enormous abstract paintings that looked as though a toddler had thrown a tantrum with a paint bucket. Every last piece would have to go. Matthew stood beside me, a legal pad in hand, making meticulous notes. The moving truck is scheduled for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Professional movers, fully insured. Their instructions are to handle everything with care before transporting it to a storage unit. Their personal belongings only, I clarified. Anything that was in this house before Eleanor passed away stays here. Of course. Matthew's pen scratched across the paper. What about the vehicles? I walked to the window and looked down at the circular driveway where 3 cars were parked. Eleanor's classic Mercedes sedan, the Range Rover I had been driving for the past 5 years, and Leo's ostentatious red BMW convertible, a gift Grace had bought him for his last birthday, using money she didn't have. The BMW needs to be repossessed, I said, my voice calm and even. I believe you'll find that the loan was co-signed by someone whose assets are no longer sufficient to back it. Matthew's smile was predatory. I'll make a few calls. We spent the next hour touring the house, cataloging every offensive alteration that needed to be undone. Leo had imposed his tasteless mark on every single room, operating under the flawed assumption that louder was synonymous with better. The dining room, the scene of my humiliation, was particularly egregious. He had replaced our treasured family portraits with grotesque sculptures of twisted metal. The man has no taste, Matthew observed, poking at a hideous lamp shaped like a chrome tree. He has no class, I corrected. There is a significant difference. At precisely 6 o'clock that evening, the sound of the front door slamming open echoed through the house, followed by Leo's screeching voice. "Walter! Walter! Where are you?" I descended the main staircase slowly, my hand gliding along the polished mahogany banister that Eleanor and I had chosen together a quarter of a century ago. Leo stood in the foyer, still clad in the flashy red suit from the morning, now rumpled and stained. His makeup was smeared, and he looked utterly unhinged. Grace hovered behind him, a pale ghost of a woman who looked as if she wished the floor would swallow her whole. "There you are," Leo spat, his voice shrill with desperation. "We need to talk." "Good evening, Leo." "Grace." I nodded politely to each of them. "I trust you've made progress with your packing." "We are not going anywhere." Leo stamped his foot like a petulant child. "This is our home." "No," I said pleasantly. "This is my time's home. You have been guests here, and your invitation has now been rescinded. You can't do this. We'll fight the will. We'll prove you manipulated Eleanor." Matthew appeared at my shoulder, his legal pad still in hand. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore, any attempt to contest the will results in Grace forfeiting her $5,000 inheritance. The legal documents are quite explicit on that point." Leo's face flushed a deep, unattractive shade of crimson. "Who asked you, you dried-up old spinster?" I felt Matthew tense beside me, but my friend was far too disciplined to rise to such a crude taunt. "Leo," I said softly, "you seem distressed. Perhaps you should sit down." "I'm not distressed. I am furious. You think you can just waltz in here and steal our life?" "Steal?" I arched an eyebrow. "From whom exactly?" "This house has been in the Whitmore family for 4 generations. I have lived here for 35 years. You have been here for 3. I'm quite curious as to your personal definition of theft." Grace finally found her voice. "Dad, please. We're family. Surely we can find some sort of compromise." I studied my daughter's face, the weak chin, the watery blue eyes, the way she couldn't quite meet my gaze. When had she become this stranger? When had the little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call them beautiful flowers transformed into a woman who could call her own father a pest? "Grace," I said gently, Yesterday, you sat at my birthday dinner and watched your husband humiliate me. You nodded in agreement when he called me a burden. You concurred when he said I was a pest. I shook my head sadly. There is no coming back from that. But I didn't mean. You meant every single word. And now, you must live with the consequences. Leo pushed past Grace, invading my personal space. I could smell the faint, acrid odor of desperation beneath his expensive cologne. Listen to me, you old wizard. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but... Old wizard? I interrupted, my voice still perfectly calm. How fascinating. Yesterday, I was a burden and a pest. Today, I'm an old wizard. Tell me, Leo, what new title will I have tomorrow? You'll be nothing, he screamed. We will contest this will. We'll prove you're incompetent. You'll be homeless, I finished for him. The moving truck arrives at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I strongly suggest you begin packing. I turned to leave, but Leo's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His nails were long and sharp, and I felt them dig into my skin through the fabric of my jacket. Don't you dare walk away from me. The room fell silent. Matthew stepped forward, his phone already in his hand. I'm calling the police. That's assault. No, I said softly, looking down at Leo's hand clamped on my arm. Let him hold on. I want to remember this precise moment. Something in my tone made Leo release me as if he'd been burned. You see, I continued, my voice dangerously quiet. You've just given me something incredibly valuable. You've given me evidence. I looked at Matthew. You witnessed Mr. Whitmore physically assault me in my own home, correct? I did indeed. And you have your phone recording? I do. I smiled at Leo, and I saw him take an involuntary step backward. Congratulations, dear boy. You've just committed a crime on camera. That should make the eviction proceedings much simpler. You're bluffing, he whispered, but all the bravado had vanished from his voice. Am I? I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I suggest you leave now, before I decide to press charges. This isn't over, Leo hissed as Grace, finally showing a spark of sense, began dragging him toward the door. Oh, but it is, I called after them. Your part in this family story is officially over. What happens from this point forward is entirely up to me. After they had gone, Matthew and I stood in the sudden profound silence of my house. Through the windows, I could see the gardens that Eleanor and I had planted together, the fountain where we used to sit on warm summer evenings, the rose bushes that had faithfully bloomed for 2 decades. How do you feel? Matthew asked. I walked to the bar cart and poured myself a glass of Eleanor's finest scotch, the single malt she reserved for special occasions. Powerful, I said, raising the glass in a silent toast to her memory. For the first time in months, I feel powerful. But even as I savored this initial victory, I knew it was merely the opening salvo. Leo had called me an old wizard, but he had no inkling of what this old wizard was truly capable of. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The moving truck arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, just as I had promised. I watched from my bedroom window as 2 professional movers began carrying boxes from the guest room where Grace and Leo had apparently spent a restless night. Even through the thick glass, I could hear the shrill, demanding, desperate tones of Leo's voice. I dressed with care, selecting a cream-colored suit and my pearl jewelry, applying my aftershave with the same steady hand I had used for 40 years. When one is about to systematically dismantle someone's life, it is of the utmost importance to look impeccable. By the time I descended the stairs, the movers were already hauling out the last of the gaudy furniture Leo had brought in. The white leather couch, the chrome tables, the hideous abstract paintings, all of it was vanishing into the back of the truck, like the tacky nightmare it had always been. Sir, One of the movers approached me politely. "We found these in the master bedroom." He held out several pieces of expensive-looking jewelry. A diamond tennis bracelet, emerald earrings, a ruby pendant necklace. "Those belong to my late wife's first husband," I said calmly, taking the pieces. "They'll be going into the safe deposit box, where they belong." Leo appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud, his hair disheveled and yesterday's makeup still smeared beneath his eyes. "Those are mine. Grace gave them to me." I held up the ruby pendant, watching it catch the morning light. "Actually, Grace gave you my former mother-in-law's jewelry that was never hers to give." I looked up at him, my expression one of mild curiosity. "Did you truly believe a woman with no independent income could afford rubies of this quality? She's not poor. The Whitmores have money." "Had money," I corrected, my tone gentle. "Past tense. The Whitmore's times had times money. Now, Walter Whitmore has money. Grace Whitmore has $5,000 and a watch collection." The color drained from his face as the full weight of his new reality crashed down upon him yet again. It was a fascinating process to observe, like watching someone in freefall finally realize there is no parachute. Matthew appeared at my elbow, a clipboard in hand, wearing the deeply satisfied expression of a man whose legal strategies are unfolding flawlessly. "The BMW has been repossessed," he announced cheerfully. Apparently, the loan went into default the moment the co-signer's assets were transferred out of her name. "My car!" Leo shrieked, sprinting to the window. Sure enough, a tow truck was in the process of hauling his shiny red convertible onto its flatbed. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can do whatever I want," I replied calmly. "It's truly remarkable how much power one has when one owns everything." Grace emerged from upstairs, carrying 2 suitcases, looking like a woman being led to her own execution. "Dad, please? We understand you're angry, but we're family. Surely there's some way." "Some way what?" I asked pleasantly. "Some way you can continue to live off my inheritance while treating me like dirt? Some way you can maintain a lifestyle you never earned?" I shook my head. "I don't think so, Grace." "But where will we go?" Her voice cracked, sounding like an adolescent's. "I believe Leo mentioned that his parents are quite wealthy. Perhaps they can offer some assistance." I smiled that cold, sharp smile that was quickly becoming my trademark. "Of course, you might want to call them quickly. Word travels fast in certain circles, and I imagine they'll be hearing about your financial difficulties very soon." Leo's face went white. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" "Tell the truth about your situation?" I tilted my head, studying him as a biologist might study a particularly interesting insect. "Why on earth would I hide it? You're broke, homeless, and entirely dependent on the charity of others. These are simply facts." "We're not homeless," he protested weakly. "We'll figure something out." "Of course you will." I walked to the front door and held it open for them. "But you'll be figuring it out from somewhere else." As they loaded the last of their bags into their one remaining vehicle, Grace's modest sedan, I stood on the front steps of my beautiful home and watched them drive away. Leo didn't look back, but Grace did. Through the rear window, I saw her face. A portrait of loss and humiliation, the face of someone who was finally, painfully, understanding the true cost of her betrayal. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a cold, clean sense of completion. Matthew joined me on the steps. Phase 1 complete. Phase 1 complete? I echoed, turning back toward the house, my mind already busy with redecorating plans. Now for Phase 2, which is... I smiled, my mind racing through the myriad ways. A person with $45 million and a brilliant legal mind for a friend. could make life exceptionally interesting for two people who had foolishly made an enemy of the wrong man. Social destruction, I said simply. They wanted to see what happens when you corner an old man. Let me show them what happens when you corner an old man with resources. That afternoon, I began to make a series of phone calls. These were not angry, theatrical confrontations, but the kind of quiet, strategic communications that men of my generation and social standing have perfected over decades of managing delicate situations. My first call was to Patrick Blackwood, the president of the country club where Grace and Leo held a membership. Patrick and I had served on several charity boards together over the years. "Walter, my dear fellow," he said warmly, "I was so sorry to hear about Eleanor. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, thank you, Patrick. Actually, that's the reason for my call. I wanted to inform you that Grace and Leo will no longer be members of the club." "Oh, are they relocating?" "In a manner of speaking, there have been some financial difficulties, and they are unfortunately no longer in a position to afford the membership fees." I let the statement hang in the air, allowing its implications to sink in. "I thought it best, you know, in case there are any outstanding charges on their account." "I see." Patrick's voice had cooled several degrees. "In our social sphere, there was no greater sin than being unable to pay one's debts. I'll have the accounting office look into it immediately. Thank you for the heads up, Walter." "Of course." "Oh, and Patrick? If anyone should ask, I'd prefer not to discuss the details. You understand how awkward these family matters can be." "Of course, Walter. Complete discretion." But we both knew the truth. By that evening, half the membership of the country club would know that Grace and Leo Whitmore had suffered some sort of catastrophic financial collapse. And by the next day, the other half would know as well. My second call was to Victor Chang, the editor of the society pages for the local newspaper. Victor and I had collaborated on numerous charity events, and he had always been deeply appreciative of my generous donations. "Victor, I wanted to give you a quiet heads up regarding the Whitmore family situation," I said. "I thought there might be some public interest, given Eleanor's prominence in the business community." "What sort of situation, Walter?" "Well, it seems that Eleanor's will has caused quite a stir. Without delving into the specifics, let's just say that certain individuals made assumptions about their inheritance that have proven to be incorrect." "Are you implying that Grace did not inherit her mother's estate?" "I'm saying that Eleanor's final wishes were very specific, and some family members are finding the reality to be quite different from their expectations." I could practically hear the gears of Victor's journalistic mind turning. "This sounds like a significant story." "Oh, I couldn't possibly comment further. You know how private one must be about these matters. But I felt you should be aware in case it becomes newsworthy." By my third call, I was in a rhythm. I contacted the manager of the expensive boutique where Leo shopped, the maitre d' their favorite upscale restaurant, the concierge at the hotel where they celebrated their anniversaries. Each conversation was brief, tactful, and utterly devastating. "I just wanted to let you know that the Whitmores will no longer be able to maintain their usual level of patronage. There have been some unexpected financial developments. I thought you should be prepared, in the event they attempt to make charges they can no longer cover." By evening, I had made 12 calls. 12 small, polite, perfectly reasonable calls that would systematically incinerate their social standing within our community. Matthew arrived for dinner that evening with a bottle of excellent champagne and a look of satisfaction that mirrored my own. "How was your afternoon?" he asked, as I expertly uncorked the bottle. "Productive." I poured 2 flutes of the golden bubbling liquid. "I have always believed that the most effective warfare is waged with surgical precision, not with nuclear bombs. And how does it feel? I raised my glass and looked around the dining room, which was already beginning to feel like my own again, with the removal of Leo's tacky additions. The family portraits were back on the walls. The antique chandelier cast a warm, inviting glow over the polished mahogany table, and the silence was blessedly peaceful. "It feels like justice," I said simply. But even as we toasted my victory, I knew this was still just the beginning. Grace and Leo had humiliated me in my own home, on my birthday, in front of the memory of the woman I had loved for 35 years. That transgression required more than just eviction and social embarrassment. That required a complete and total dismantling. And I was just getting started. Within a week, the ripple effect of my phone calls had spread through our social circle like a wildfire. I hadn't uttered a single untrue or overtly cruel word. I had simply informed certain key individuals that Grace and Leo were experiencing financial difficulties. In a community where perception is paramount and social standing dictates access to everything from the best tables at restaurants to invitations to important events, this quiet campaign of information was more devastating than any direct assault could have ever been. I received updates on the fallout through Matthew, who maintained his own extensive network of friends and contacts throughout the city. "Leo called Patrick Blackwood 3 times yesterday," Matthew reported, as we enjoyed afternoon tea in my newly restored morning room. He was demanding to know why their country club membership had been suspended. And what was Patrick's response? He informed him that their account was significantly past due, and that until the balance was paid in full, all their privileges were revoked. Matthew's smile was wicked, apparently. Leo screamed so loudly that Patrick had to hold the phone a foot away from his ear. I sipped my Earl Grey tea from one of Eleanor's grandmother's china cups and felt a warm sense of satisfaction settle in my chest. How very unfortunate for him. Oh, it gets better or worse, depending on one's perspective. Matthew consulted a small notebook. The boutique where he shops has placed a hold on his credit. The restaurant where they celebrated their anniversary last month has quietly informed its staff that the Whitmores are no longer welcome, and the hotel concierge you spoke with has disseminated the information throughout the entire city's hospitality network. "Thorough," I murmured with approval. Grace attempted to secure a loan yesterday, from 3 different banks. Matthew's eyes gleamed. All 3 applications were denied. It seems that when one's father owns $45 million and has very publicly cut one off, banks become remarkably risk-averse. I set down my teacup with deliberate precision. "How do you know about the loan applications?" "Jessica Bradley at First National is a client of mine. She called as a professional courtesy, wondering if there had been some sort of family dispute she should be aware of." Matthew's expression was a mask of perfect innocence. I simply told her that Eleanor's will had created some complications in the family dynamic. The beauty of our social circle was its interconnectedness. A banker here, a club president there, a journalist with the right connections. It all formed an intricate web that could either support you or strangle you, depending on your standing within it. My phone rang, interrupting my contemplation. The caller ID displayed Grace's number. "Shall I answer it?" I asked Matthew. "This should be interesting." I picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello, Grace." "Dad." Her voice was strained, laced with a desperation I had never heard before. "We need to talk." "We are talking. In person, please. This is getting out of hand." I glanced around my peaceful morning room with its soft yellow wallpaper and a vase of fresh flowers from my garden. "I'm quite comfortable right where I am. If you have something to say, you can say it now. People are treating us like we have the plague." The words burst out of her in a torrent of anguish. "Our credit cards have been canceled. The bank won't even give us an appointment. And Leo's parents, God, Dad, they hung up on us." His parents hung up on you? How shocking. I thought you said they were wealthy. They are. But they're also social climbers of the highest order. And apparently, word of our situation has reached them. Her voice cracked. They said they couldn't afford to be associated with a financial scandal. I felt a flutter of genuine surprise. I had underestimated the speed and totality with which the social destruction would work. In our world, reputation was currency, and I had just rendered Grace and Leo utterly bankrupt. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and to my surprise, I almost meant it. Almost. Are you really?" Her voice turned bitter. "Because it feels like you are intentionally destroying our lives." "I'm not destroying anything, Grace. I am simply living my life with the resources your mother entrusted to me. What you are experiencing are the natural consequences of your own choices." "Our choices? What choices?" I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where Eleanor and I had spent so many happy afternoons. "You chose to allow your husband to humiliate me at my own birthday dinner. You chose to call me a pest. You chose to align yourself with someone who viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to his inheritance." My voice remained calm, measured. "Those were your choices, Grace. These are the consequences. But we're family." "No," I said softly. We're times. Family. Family does not treat each other the way you treated me." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When Grace spoke again, her voice was smaller, more like the little girl she had once been. "What do you want from us?" The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? An apology? Groveling? Reconciliation? The thought of any of those things left me feeling tired, not satisfied. "I want you to understand," I said finally. "I want you to know what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated as worthless, to have the people you love look at you as if you are nothing but a burden." Okay, I understand. I'm sorry. We're both sorry. Can we work something out? Some kind of arrangement?" Matthew was watching me intently, his pen poised over his legal pad. This was the pivotal moment, the one that would define everything that was to come. "Grace," I said, "do you remember when you were 7 years old and you broke Mr. Henderson's window with your baseball?" "What?" "Yes, I remember. Do you remember what I told you then?" Another pause. "You said that being sorry wasn't enough, that I had to make it right. And what did you do?" "I used my allowance to pay for the new window. And I apologized to Mr. Henderson. And I did his yard work for a month." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But Dad, how do we make this times right? How do we pay for this window?" I closed my eyes. A vivid image of that 7-year-old girl flashing in my mind, grass stains on her knees, tears in her eyes, genuinely remorseful for her mistake. Where had that girl gone? When had she become this weak woman who could stand by and watch her husband abuse her father? "That's the thing about some windows, Grace," I said gently. "Once they're shattered, they can't be fixed." I ended the call and turned back to Matthew. "Any regrets?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the path I had chosen? Did I regret using my resources to systematically dismantle the social and financial standing of my only child? "No," I said finally, "but I think it's time to accelerate the timeline." "What do you mean?" I smiled, feeling that cold, clean sense of purpose settle over me once again. "I mean, it's time to stop playing defense and start playing offense." I paused, letting the idea form. What is the most devastating thing one could do to someone who has nothing left to lose? Matthew's pen began to move across the page. "Give them a glimmer of hope, and then extinguish it." Exactly. I sat back down and poured myself another cup of tea. "Tell me, What would happen if someone were to offer Grace a job? A good job, with a substantial salary and benefits. She would jump at it. And what would happen if that job offer were rescinded at the last possible moment due to, say, a background check that revealed significant financial instability and family discord? Matthew's smile was as sharp as a razor. That would be devastating. What about an apartment? A nice place in a decent neighborhood, with a lease all ready to be signed, only to discover that the landlord had received concerning information about their reliability as tenants, or a loan approval that gets reversed at the last minute because of new information about their changed circumstances. We spent the next hour meticulously planning what Matthew dubbed the Hope Campaign, a series of tantalizing opportunities that would be dangled in front of Grace and Leo, only to be cruelly snatched away at the very moment they began to believe their luck had turned. Each manufactured hope would be perfectly legal, ethically sound, and absolutely crushing. "This is psychological warfare, Walter," Matthew observed. "This is justice," I corrected. "They wanted to cast me aside as if I were nothing. They wanted to make me feel powerless and worthless. Now, they will understand precisely how that feels." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, my thoughts turned to the book that had been my constant companion in the darkest days following Eleanor's death. Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. Times had taught me that healing doesn't always mean forgiveness. Sometimes it means taking back your power. Sometimes it means refusing to be a victim. "Matthew," I said, "I want you to call them tomorrow. Tell them you've reconsidered our conversation and that you might be in a position to help them." "Help them how?" "You are going to offer Grace a consulting position with your firm. A good salary, flexible hours, a chance to rebuild her reputation." I smiled. "And then, 3 days before she is scheduled to start, you are going to discover some irregularities in her background check." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that make her completely unemployable." Matthew's laugh was rich and deeply satisfied. "Walter, you have become absolutely ruthless." "No," I said, my mind replaying the scene at the birthday dinner. Grace's weak nod as Leo called me a pest, the way they had tried to discard me like a piece of unwanted furniture. "I have become powerful. There is a profound difference." The next morning, I awoke in my beautiful bedroom, in my beautiful house, with my beautiful life spread out before me like a banquet. I was 63 years old, independently wealthy, and entirely free to write the next chapter of my own story. Some people would say I should forgive and forget. Some would say that revenge was beneath me, that I should be the bigger person. But those people had never been made to feel worthless by the people they loved the most. Those people had never been called a pest at their own birthday dinner. Those people had never watched their own child choose cruelty over kindness. I had 45 million reasons to be exactly the size person I wanted to be. And on that day, I wanted to be the size person who taught invaluable lessons about consequences. After all, some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Matthew's call to Grace came at 9 o'clock the next morning, precisely as we had planned. I listened on the extension as he offered her the consulting position with his firm research and paralegal work. $40,000 a year to start, with the possibility of advancement. "Are you serious?" Grace's voice was so full of desperate hope that I almost felt a pang of pity for her. "Almost. Quite serious," Matthew replied, his tone perfectly professional, giving no hint of the trap being laid. "Despite our family complications, I believe in giving people second chances. When could I start?" "Tomorrow. Today. Whenever you need me. Let's say Monday, shall we? That gives me time to process the paperwork and run the standard background checks. Nothing to worry about. Just routine due diligence." After he hung up, Matthew turned to me with a look of profound satisfaction. Hook, line, and sinker. Now, we wait. The waiting was the sweetest part. For 3 days, I observed through my network of friends and contacts as Grace and Leo began to believe their fortunes had turned. They celebrated at a mid-priced restaurant, a meal paid for with what must have been the very last of their available credit. They looked at apartments in respectable neighborhoods. Grace even bought a new suit for her first day of work. Hope was a beautiful thing to watch bloom on their faces. It made what came next so much more effective. On Friday afternoon, Matthew called Grace with the devastating news. "I am afraid there's been a complication with your background check," he said, his voice heavy with manufactured regret. "Some concerning information has come to light regarding your financial stability and family relationships." "What kind of information?" "I can't go into specifics, but my partners feel that hiring you at this time would present too much of a liability for the firm. I am truly sorry, Grace. I really did want to help." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Grace, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here." Her voice was hollow, utterly defeated. "Who would tell you things about my family relationships? I'm not at liberty to say. These background checks are quite thorough, you understand. They contact references, former colleagues, social contacts." Matthew let the implication hang in the air. "So, someone who knows us. Talk to your investigators. Professional investigations often turn up information from unexpected sources." After Matthew ended the call, we sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. "That was cruel," he said finally. "That was justice," I replied. "They wanted to play games with my life. Now they get to learn the rules." But the job disappointment was just the opening act. Over the next week, I orchestrated a symphony of false hopes and crushing disappointments. The apartment they had applied for was suddenly unavailable due to concerns about financial stability. The loan they had been pre-approved for was denied after a more thorough review of their circumstances. Even the Wyandotte seat, modest rental car they needed, while apartment hunting was repossessed when their credit card was unexpectedly declined. Each disappointment was perfectly legal, entirely reasonable, and absolutely devastating to two people who had already lost everything. Matthew kept me updated on their escalating desperation through his various sources. They were living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, paying week by week with cash that was rapidly dwindling. Leo had apparently thrown a screaming tantrum in the lobby when he discovered that the neighboring rooms could hear everything through the paper-thin walls. Grace had been spotted at 3 different employment agencies in 2 days, growing more haggard and desperate with each rejection. "They're starting to crack," Matthew reported over lunch at the country club, where I had been welcomed back with the warm deference that money and social position command. Leo was overheard at the grocery store yesterday, crying on the phone to someone about how that old wizard had ruined their lives. Old wizard again? I sipped my wine, a flicker of amusement touching my lips. I seemed to be moving up in the world. First, I was a burden and a pest, then an old wizard. Now I'm apparently a wizard with actual power. The question is, how far do you want to take this, Walter? I considered the question, my gaze sweeping across the elegant dining room where I had lunched twice a week for 20 years. The same faces, the same conversations, the same comfortable routine of a life well lived. This was my world, my community, my place. Grace and Leo had tried to tear it all down, had tried to cast me out and make me into a powerless old man, dependent on their charity. "I want them gone," I said finally, my voice firm with resolve. "Completely gone. I want them to understand that some actions have permanent consequences." "Gone how?" "Out of the state, out of the region, far enough away that they can never again be a part of my life or my community. I set down my wine glass with determination. I want them to start over somewhere else, with nothing. And every time they think about rebuilding their lives, I want them to remember that they chose this path. Matthew nodded slowly. That's a long-term campaign. I have time, resources, and a very good memory. That afternoon, I made another series of calls. This time, not to destroy opportunities, but to create one very specific opportunity in a city 3,000 miles away. A job with a company that would never check references too carefully, offering just enough hope to make relocation seem like the only viable option. Phoenix, I told Matthew after the arrangements were made. Hot, dry, and far from anyone they know. Perfect for a fresh start, don't you think? And if they don't take the bait? I smiled, thinking of the private investigator I had hired. The one who would ensure that any opportunities closer to home would mysteriously evaporate, while the Phoenix job would seem like a godsend. Oh, they'll take it, because it will be the only option they have left. 2 days later, Grace called me. For the first time in weeks, there was something other than desperation in her voice. A fragile, tentative hope that made my heart ache for the girl she had once been. Dad, I wanted to let you know, I got a job offer in Phoenix. Phoenix, that's quite a long way away. I know, but it's a good opportunity. Sales manager for a construction company. The pay is decent, and they're willing to help with relocation expenses. She paused, and I could hear her take a deep breath. I wanted to ask, would you be willing to provide a reference if they call? The request hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. She was asking me to help her escape the very trap I had so carefully set, to give her my blessing to start over, to extend some small measure of mercy in the midst of her self-inflicted devastation. What kind of reference would you like me to provide, Grace? I asked carefully. Just that I'm honest and reliable, that I made some terrible mistakes, but that I'm trying to do better. I looked out the window at the gardens Eleanor and I had planted together, at the life we had built through decades of love, compromise, and mutual respect. Grace had been a part of that life once, had been the center of it for so many years. Grace, I said softly, are you truly sorry? Not just sorry that you're suffering the consequences, but truly sorry for what you did. Yes, she whispered, her voice cracking. God, yes. I replay that dinner in my head every single night. I hear myself calling you a pest, and I just want to die from the shame of it. I was weak, Dad. I was afraid of Leo, afraid of confrontation, and I let him poison me against you. I am so sorry. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something other than cold, satisfying resolve. I felt a profound weariness. I was tired of the anger, tired of the revenge, tired of the meticulous orchestration of other people's misery. And Leo? Is he sorry? A long pause. Leo is angry. He blames you for everything. He says you're vindictive and cruel, and that you should have shared Mom's money with us. Another pause. He doesn't understand that we brought this on ourselves. I see. Dad, I know I don't deserve your help. I know I have no right to ask. But Phoenix, it feels like maybe we could start over there. Maybe we could build something decent, something we actually earned. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I just want to be someone you could be proud of again. I closed my eyes and made a decision that surprised even myself. I'll provide the reference, I said. I will tell them that you are honest and that you learn from your mistakes. Really? You do that? Yes. But Grace, you must understand this. If you take this job, if you move to Phoenix, that is the end. We will not speak again. You won't visit. You won't call. You will no longer be a part of my life. This is your one chance to disappear and start over, but it comes with the absolute understanding that there is no coming back. I understand. Do you? Do you really? Because this is not an exile with the possibility of return. This is permanent. I understand, she repeated, and I could hear the tears in her voice. And Dad, thank you. I know you don't owe me anything, but thank you. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my beautiful living room and cried for the first time since Eleanor's funeral. Not for Grace and Leo, not for their suffering, but for the family we had never been able to become, for the love that had been poisoned by greed and weakness, for the little girl who had once brought me dandelions and called them beautiful flowers. Matthew found me there an hour later, a box of tissues on the table beside me. You're letting her go, he said. It was not a question. I'm letting her go. There was a difference. And Leo? I thought about my son-in-law, about his cruelty and his arrogance, about the smug smile on his face as he called me a burden. Leo made his choice when he married into this family and decided I was his enemy. He'll have to live with Grace's choices now, just as I have had to live with them. Any regrets? I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the pain I had caused? The systematic destruction of their lives? The cold, calculated precision with which I had orchestrated their downfall? No, I said finally. They needed to learn that actions have consequences, that you cannot treat people like garbage and expect to continue benefiting from their love. I wiped my eyes and squared my shoulders. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. 3 weeks later, I received a postcard from Phoenix. It was a picture of a desert sunset, with 6 words written on the back in Grace's familiar handwriting. Starting over, thank you, your daughter. I filed it away in my desk drawer and got on with the business of living my life, my beautiful, powerful, completely independent life. After all, I had spent 63 years learning how to be strong. It was high time I started enjoying the benefits of that education. The postcard from Phoenix remained in my desk drawer for exactly 1 week before I took it out and threw it away. It wasn't an act of anger or spite, but one of closure, a conscious decision to close that chapter of my life completely. Grace had made her choice, and I had made mine. There was simply nothing left to be said between us. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. I had the house redecorated from top to bottom, meticulously erasing every last trace of Leo's gaudy taste and Grace's passive presence. The dining room, the scene of my greatest humiliation, was transformed into a library, lined with rich mahogany shelves and filled with the first editions I had collected over a lifetime. The guest room they had occupied became my art studio, a space flooded with natural light from the new, larger windows I had installed. Matthew became a near-daily visitor, and we fell into the comfortable routine of 2 old friends who had weathered enough of life's storms to appreciate its simple pleasures. Tea in the afternoon, a game of chess on Thursdays, and charity board meetings where my substantial donations guaranteed me both influence and respect. You seem different, Walter, Matthew observed one afternoon as we worked together in my garden. I had taken up serious gardening again, finding a profound sense of peace in the steady cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting. Different? How? Settled, as if you've finally grown into yourself. I considered his words as I carefully pruned the rose bushes Eleanor and I had planted for our 15th anniversary. They were thriving now, producing blooms more vibrant and beautiful than they had in years. I think I've finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. And which are you? Alone, I said, without a moment's hesitation. Completely and gloriously alone. But my newfound peace was shattered 3 months later by a phone call that changed everything once again. Mr. Whitmore. The voice was young, female, and audibly nervous. This is Kevin Martinez from Phoenix General Hospital. I'm calling about Grace Whitmore. My hand tightened on the receiver. What about her? She listed you as her emergency contact, sir. She's been in an accident. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What kind of accident? A construction site incident. She's in stable condition, but she's asking for you. I stared out the window at my peaceful, orderly garden, at the life I had so carefully and deliberately reconstructed. How bad is it? She has some broken ribs, a concussion, and a fractured leg. She'll recover, but Mr. Whitmore, she doesn't have insurance. The company she was working for, apparently, they've been operating without the proper workers' compensation coverage. Of course they had. The job I had so carefully arranged for her was with a company I had researched thoroughly legitimate enough to pass a cursory background check, but also known for cutting corners. Ensuring that Grace's fresh start would be anything but easy. And Leo? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. He's here, but he's been making quite a scene, demanding treatments they can't afford, threatening to sue everyone in sight. The staff asked me to call you because Grace specifically requested that we contact you, not him, for any medical decisions. I closed my eyes and made a decision that would either be my damnation or my redemption. I'll be on the next flight. Matthew insisted on accompanying me, and 12 hours later, we were walking through the sterile, antiseptic corridors of Phoenix General Hospital, heading toward a room I had never expected to enter. Grace looked smaller than I remembered, pale and fragile against the stark white of the hospital bed. The strong jawline she had inherited from Eleanor was softened by pain, and her eyes, those blue eyes that had once looked at me with such adoration, were clouded with medication and a deep, weary regret. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You came." I came. I sat in the chair beside her bed, studying the face of this woman who had once been my little girl. "How are you feeling?" Like I got hit by a truck, which technically I did. She attempted a smile, but it turned into a wince of pain. "Backhoe malfunctioned. Wrong place, wrong time. Where's Leo?" Her expression darkened. "In the parking lot, screaming at his lawyer on the phone. He's trying to figure out who he can sue." She looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something that might have been shame. "He wanted me to call you for money, for the medical bills. And you said?" "I said I'd rather die than ask you for another penny." Her voice was stronger now, with a hint of the woman I had raised her to be. "I meant it too." We sat in silence for a moment, the rhythmic beeping of the machines a soft counterpoint to the tension in the room. Through the window, I could see the Phoenix skyline, a landscape of glass and steel shimmering in the desert heat. "How has it been?" I asked finally. "The fresh start." Grace laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Hard. Harder than I ever thought it would be. The job paid okay, but the hours were brutal. Leo hated everything about Arizona. The heat, the people, the fact that no one here gave a damn about his family's money back east." She shifted carefully in the bed. "He blamed me for all of it. For the move, for our financial problems, for the fact that we couldn't afford the lifestyle he felt he was entitled to. And now, he's planning to leave me." She said it matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "He's been talking to a divorce lawyer. Apparently, a wife with massive medical debt and no insurance isn't part of his long-term plan." I felt a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction, followed immediately by an unexpected wave of sadness. Not for Leo, he had made his bed and could lie in it, but for Grace, who was finally learning what it felt like to be abandoned by someone who had claimed to love her. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Are you really? I considered the question carefully. I'm sorry that you are in pain. I'm sorry that you are learning these lessons in such a difficult way. But no, I am not sorry that you are learning them. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. The door to the room swung open, and Leo swept in like a force of nature, his hair perfectly styled despite the crisis, his designer handbag clutched in his manicured hands. He stopped short when he saw me. What is he doing here? He demanded, as if I weren't sitting right in front of him. I called him Leo, Grace said quietly. You called him asterisk? After everything he's done to us? Leo's voice rose to that familiar, grating shriek. Do you have any idea what we've been through because of him? Yes, Grace said, her voice still quiet, but gaining a new strength. I have a very clear idea of what we've been through, because of me asterisk, because of you asterisk. This is all his fault. He destroyed our lives. He turned everyone against us. He responded exactly the way any reasonable person would respond to being treated like garbage. Grace interrupted, and I felt a jolt of recognition. This was the woman I had hoped she might one day become, the one who could stand up for what was right. We brought this on ourselves, Leo. All of it. Leo's face contorted through several shades of red before settling on a deep, mottled purple. How dare you? After everything I've sacrificed for you, after everything I've given up? What have you given up? Grace asked with genuine curiosity. What exactly have you sacrificed? I gave up my life back east. I followed you to this God-forsaken desert. I have stood by you through all of this humiliation. You've stood by me? Grace's laugh was bitter now. You've been planning to divorce me for 3 weeks. Your lawyer called while I was unconscious. The silence that followed was deafening. Leo's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You went through my phone? He finally managed. The hospital needed insurance information. They handed me your phone when mine was broken in the accident. Grace's eyes never left his face. 17 calls to divorce attorneys, Leo. 17. I watched this scene unfold with the detached fascination of someone observing a natural disaster. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? For Grace to finally see Leo's true nature, for his cruelty and selfishness to be laid bare. So why did I feel so profoundly tired instead of triumphant? I was exploring my options, Leo said defensively. We have no money, no prospects. And now you're going to be buried in medical debt. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to stand by your wife in sickness and in health, I said quietly. It was part of the vows you made at the wedding I paid for. Leo whirled on me, his eyes blazing. Don't you dare lecture me about marriage. You manipulated your way into that money. You poisoned everyone against us. You destroyed our lives for no reason. No reason? I stood up slowly, drawing myself to my full height. Let me remind you why we are here, Leo. You humiliated me at my own birthday dinner. You called me a burden and a pest. You tried to throw me out of my own home and steal my inheritance. You treated me as if I were worthless, as if I were nothing. My voice remained calm, controlled, but every word was delivered with surgical precision. I didn't destroy your life. I simply refused to allow you to destroy mine. You're a vindictive old wizard. There's that phrase again. I smiled, that cold, sharp smile that had become my signature. You know what, Leo? You're absolutely right. I am vindictive. I am old. And I am, apparently, a wizard. I picked up my coat and walked toward the door. But I am also rich, powerful, and free. Can you say the same? I paused in the doorway and looked back at Grace. The hospital bills will be taken care of. Consider it my final gift to the girl you used to be. Dad, wait. No more waiting, Grace. No more chances. No more conversations. No more hope for reconciliation. I met her eyes one last time. Be well. Be better than you were. But be those things somewhere far, far away from me. I walked out of that hospital room and out of their lives forever. Matthew followed silently, and we didn't speak until we were in the taxi heading back to the airport. That was surprisingly generous of you, he said finally. Paying her medical bills. It wasn't generous, I replied, watching the stark desert landscape scroll past the window. It was final. Now there is no debt between us, no obligation, no reason for any future contact. I settled back in my seat. Some gifts are really just another form of goodbye. The flight home was peaceful. I read a novel, I dozed, and I planned the rest of my life with the calm satisfaction of someone who has finally completely closed a difficult and painful chapter. When we landed, Matthew asked if I wanted company for the evening. No, I said. I want to go home, sit in my beautiful house, and remember what peace feels like. And that is exactly what I did. I sat in my library with a glass of Eleanor's best wine and a book I had been meaning to read for years. Outside, my gardens bloomed in the soft evening light, and inside, my house settled around me like a comfortable, protective embrace. I was 63 years old, independently wealthy, and completely free to write my own story. Some people might say I should feel guilty about what I had done to Grace and Leo. Some people might say that revenge was beneath me, that I should have been the bigger person. But those people had never been made to feel worthless by the people they loved most. Those people had never been called a pest at their own birthday dinner. Those people had never learned the hard way that sometimes the only person who will fight for your dignity is you. I raised my glass in a silent toast to my reflection in the darkened window. Here's to being exactly the size person you need to be, I said aloud, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing but peace. 6 months after the incident in Phoenix, a divorce decree arrived in the mail. It wasn't addressed to me, of course, but had been forwarded through the complex web of legal channels that Matthew so expertly maintained. Leo had finally gotten what he wanted. Freedom from a woman with no money and no prospects. The irony was delicious. I was in my garden when Matthew brought me the news, kneeling among the tomato plants I had cultivated in what used to be Leo's garish flower bed of artificial-looking hybrid roses. Real vegetables, grown for real sustenance, seemed infinitely more sensible than flowers bred more for appearance than for genuine beauty. He took her for everything she had, Matthew reported, settling into one of the wrought iron chairs Eleanor and I had bought for our 20th anniversary, which, admittedly, wasn't much. What about the medical debt? An interesting story there. Matthew's smile was wicked. Apparently, when the hospital discovered that Grace's emergency contact was worth $45 million, they became very flexible regarding payment plans. Your one-time settlement was more than enough to clear the entire debt and establish a small fund for her ongoing physical therapy. I brushed the rich soil from my hands and sat back on my heels. And Leo's reaction to the settlement? Let's just say he's discovered that divorce lawyers are expensive, and that half of nothing is still nothing. Matthew consulted his notes. He's moved back east to live with his parents. Apparently, the wealthy parents who hung up on them during their crisis were willing to take in their divorced son, but only under very strict conditions, namely, no access to the family money, a mandatory job requirement, and a signed legal agreement stating that any future financial emergencies are his responsibility alone. A warm sense of satisfaction bloomed in my chest. How poetic. The people who raised him to believe that wealth was the only measure of a person's worth are now treating him exactly as he treated me. Justice certainly has a sense of irony. I returned to my gardening, enjoying the feel of the rich earth between my fingers and the promise of a harvest I would earn through my own labor. What about Grace? Still in Phoenix. She's working for a smaller construction company now, one that actually adheres to safety regulations. The work is honest. The pay is modest. And from what I can gather, she's learning to live within her means. Good for her. No bitterness. I considered the question as I carefully transplanted a young basil plant. Bitterness is a luxury I can no longer afford. It requires too much energy, and I have far better things to do with my time. And I did. Over the past several months, I had discovered the intoxicating freedom that comes with having no obligations to anyone but oneself. I traveled, not to the crowded, tourist-filled destinations that Eleanor had preferred, but to quiet, contemplative places where I could walk along ancient paths and think my own thoughts. I read voraciously, devouring the books I had been meaning to get to for decades. I even took up watercolor painting badly, but with tremendous enjoyment. Most importantly, I learned to live for myself without apology. There's something else, Matthew said, pulling another document from his briefcase. Leo has been making inquiries. What kind of inquiries? About contesting Eleanor's will. Apparently, he's convinced there must be some legal loophole, some way to prove that you manipulated her, or that the will was somehow invalid. I set down my trowel and looked at my friend. And he's discovered what Grace already knew, that contesting the will means forfeiting even the token amounts Eleanor left. But more than that, he's learned that Eleanor's will was legally bulletproof. Witnesses, multiple revisions over several months, clear and concise statements of her reasoning. Matthew's smile was deeply satisfied. Your wife was very thorough in her efforts to protect you. I felt a wave of love for Eleanor that was both unexpected and deeply warming. Even in death, she was still protecting me from those who would do me harm. He's also been trying to find allies, Matthew continued. People who might be willing to testify that you were cruel to the family, that you drove them away unfairly. Any success? None whatsoever. It turns out that everyone who mattered saw exactly what happened at your birthday dinner. Patrick Blackwood, in particular, had some very strong words to say about people who abuse their elders. I laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. Patrick never did suffer fools gladly. The general consensus seems to be that you showed remarkable restraint in how you handled the situation. Restraint? I tasted the word. I suppose that's one way to describe systematic destruction. There was an art to what you did, Walter. You never broke a single law, never said anything that wasn't demonstrably true, never acted in any way that wasn't completely justifiable. You simply removed your protection from people who had chosen to be your enemies. I stood up and brushed the soil from my gardening apron, my gaze sweeping across my beautiful property. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees Eleanor and I had planted so many years ago, and everything was peaceful, orderly, exactly as it should be. Matthew, I said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me your honest legal opinion. Of course. Am I a bad person? He was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same meticulous care he brought to complex legal briefs. No, he said finally. You are a person who refused to be a victim. You are a person who fought back when attacked. You are a person who used the resources at your disposal to protect yourself and to teach some very valuable lessons about consequences. He paused. Are you wondering if you should feel guilty? Sometimes. Don't. What you did was measured, appropriate, and in the end, merciful. You could have destroyed them completely. You could have had them arrested for elder abuse, sued them for emotional distress, made their lives a legal nightmare for years to come. Instead, you gave them a chance to start over somewhere else, and you even paid Grace's medical bills when she was injured. But I enjoyed it, I admitted. The planning, the execution, the moment when they finally realized what had happened. I enjoyed watching them fall. Good. Matthew's voice was firm. You should enjoy justice. You should take pleasure in standing up for yourself. Too many men of our generation were taught to accept abuse gracefully, to turn the other cheek, to be endlessly forgiving. He shook his head. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is teach someone that their actions have consequences. That evening I sat in my library with a cup of tea and the book that had become my Bible during the darkest days after Eleanor's death. Asterisk. Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain Times lay open on my lap, but I wasn't reading it. Instead, I was thinking about the man who had picked up that book 8 months ago, broken, grieving, dismissed, made to feel worthless by the very people who should have loved him most. That man was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, clearer, more honest about his own worth. The grief was still there, of course. I would always miss Eleanor, but it no longer defined me. The anger was gone too, burned away by the clean, purifying fire of well-executed justice. What remained was peace, deep, abiding, unshakable peace. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, with a Phoenix area code. I almost didn't answer it. My life was perfectly complete, without any contact from my past. But in the end, curiosity got the better of me. Hello, Mr. Whitmore? This is Dana Chen, Grace's physical therapist. I felt a flicker of alarm. Is something wrong? No, nothing like that. I'm calling because Grace asked me to. She's been doing very well with her recovery, and she wanted me to tell you something. I'm listening. She wanted you to know that she's been going to therapy, not just physical therapy, but counseling, to deal with what she calls the worst mistake of her life. The young woman's voice was gentle, professional. She also wanted you to know that she's learned to manage on her own. She has a small apartment, a steady job, and she's been paying all her own bills since the divorce. That's good to hear. She asked me to tell you one more thing, if you were willing to listen. I closed my eyes, not sure I wanted to hear whatever message Grace had sent. What is it? She said to tell you that she finally understands what you meant, about some windows being broken beyond repair. She said she's not asking for forgiveness or contact or anything at all from you. She just wanted you to know that she's learned to build better windows. The line was quiet for a moment. That's all, Dana said. She just wanted you to know that the lessons you taught her weren't wasted. After I hung up, I sat in my library for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across my Persian rugs. Finally, I walked to my desk and pulled out a piece of my finest stationery cream-colored paper with my monogram embossed in gold. I wrote a single sentence in my careful, steady script. I'm glad you're building better windows. I signed it simply, W. Whitmore, and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Dana Chen, with instructions to forward it if she thought it was appropriate. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was simply an acknowledgement that some lessons, however painful, are worth learning. The next morning, I mailed the letter and then put Grace out of my mind completely. I had a life to live, and it was going to be magnificent. 1 year after that terrible birthday dinner, I threw myself a party. Not a birthday party that anniversary would always be tainted, but a celebration of independence, a celebration of the man I had become. I hired the best caterers in the city, filled my house with white roses and champagne, and invited everyone who mattered in my social circle. The guest list was impressive. Judges and politicians, business leaders and society doyens, artists and philanthropists, people who understood power, who recognized strength, who appreciated the fine art of reinvention. Matthew helped me plan the menu, but I insisted on writing the invitations myself. Each one was handwritten on my finest stationery, in the elegant script that had been polished by decades of thank you notes, sympathy cards, and all the social correspondence that accompanies a well-lived life. You are cordially invited to celebrate the first anniversary of my liberation. Each invitation read, "Join me for an evening of excellent food, fine wine, and the company of people who understand that some endings are really beginnings." The response was overwhelming. Apparently, my story had become something of a legend in our community. The widower who refused to be pushed aside, who fought back with intelligence and resources and emerged victorious. I had become, without quite meaning to, a symbol of something powerful. The night of the party, I dressed with particular care. A midnight blue silk jacket that made my silver hair look luminous, my grandfather's pearl cufflinks, and the diamond watch Eleanor had given me for our 30th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw a man who commanded respect, who took up space in the world without apology, who was handsome in a way that only comes from being completely comfortable in one's own skin. "You look magnificent, Walter," Matthew said as he arrived early to help with last-minute preparations. "Powerful. I feel powerful," I replied, adjusting a large bouquet of flowers in the main hall. "I feel like myself, for the first time in years." The guests began to arrive at 7, and soon my house was filled with laughter, conversation, and the pleasant buzz of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I moved through the crowd with an easy grace, accepting compliments and congratulations, basking in the warmth of a community that had embraced my transformation. Patrick Blackwood pulled me aside during cocktails. "Walter, my dear fellow, I must tell you, you've become quite an inspiration. Do you know that 3 men at the club have asked me for Matthew's number? Apparently, their own family situations could use a bit of legal clarity." I smiled, sipping my champagne. "Knowledge is power, Patrick, and sometimes power is the only thing that keeps us safe." Judge Harrison, whose wife had handled Eleanor's will, approached me during dinner. "Mr. Whitmore, I hope you don't mind my saying, but your situation has become something of a cautionary tale in legal circles. We're seeing more and more clients who want to protect themselves from family members who might take their generosity for granted. I'm always happy to serve as an educational example," I replied. "Prevention is so much more pleasant than a cure." But the most meaningful moment of the evening came when Victor Chang, the Society page editor, drew me aside during dessert. "Walter, I've been thinking about your story, and I wondered if you might be interested in writing about it. Not for the Society pages, but for something bigger. A book, perhaps? Or a series of articles about men reclaiming their power later in life." I considered the idea as I looked around my beautiful home, filled with people who respected and admired me. "Tell me more." There are so many men who feel invisible after 60, who think their stories are over, who accept poor treatment because they believe they have no other choice." Victor's eyes were bright with possibility. "Your story shows that it's never too late to fight back, never too late to demand respect, never too late to write your own ending. Like the book that helped me through the worst of it," I murmured, thinking of times reclaiming your peace after pain times, and how it had given me permission to choose strength over forgiveness. "Exactly like that book. You could help so many men, Walter. You could show them that age is not weakness, that silence is not submission, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be a victim." I felt a flutter of excitement. The same feeling I had experienced when I first realized I held all the power in my situation with Grace and Leo. I would need editorial support. Someone who understands the legal and financial aspects. I know just the person, Matthew said, appearing at my elbow with perfect timing. A friend of mine who specializes in empowerment literature. She'd be thrilled to work with you. As the evening wound down and the last guest departed, I stood in my foyer, surrounded by flowers and empty champagne glasses and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. My house felt alive, energized by the presence of people who appreciated what I had built. That was extraordinary, Walter, Matthew said as we began the gentle process of cleaning up. You were extraordinary. I felt extraordinary. I picked up a crystal glass and held it to the light, watching it sparkle. For 62 years, I was Eleanor's husband, Grace's father, someone defined by my relationships to other people. Tonight, I was just Walter Whitmore, powerful, independent, complete in myself. And how does that feel? I considered the question as I walked through my house, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure. In the dining room where Leo had once humiliated me, elegant guests had toasted my independence. In the living room where Grace had called me a pest, fascinating people had discussed art and politics and literature. Every room had been reclaimed, rewritten, made clean and new. It feels like coming home, I said finally, like I've finally become the person I was always meant to be. That night, I sat in my bedroom with a legal pad and began to write. Not the book that Victor had suggested that would come later, but a letter to men everywhere who had been made to feel small, invisible, and worthless. Dear brothers, I wrote, if you are reading this, you have been dismissed. You have been told you are too old, too difficult, too demanding. You have been made to feel like a burden, a pest, an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I'm here to tell you that this is a lie. You are not too old to start over. You are not too weak to fight back. You are not too anything, except perhaps too willing to accept poor treatment from people who should know better. Your story is not over. Your power is not gone. Your voice still matters, and your choices still have consequences for you and for everyone around you. The people who have dismissed you are counting on your silence, your compliance, your willingness to fade quietly into the background. They are counting on you to believe that peace is more important than justice, that family harmony is more important than self-respect. They are wrong. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is teach someone that their actions have consequences. Sometimes, the most peaceful thing you can do is fight for your own dignity. Sometimes, the most harmonious thing you can do is refuse to sing backup in your own life. You have resources you haven't even discovered yet. You have strength you've forgotten you possess. You have every right to write your own ending, to reclaim your own power, to become the man you were always meant to be. It is never too late to become magnificent. I signed the letter with love and respect, Walter Whitmore, and set it aside. Tomorrow, I would begin the book that would carry this message to men everywhere. I would tell my story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a story of reclamation, of a man who refused to disappear, who fought back with intelligence and grace, who discovered that true power comes not from controlling others, but from refusing to be controlled. I was 63 years old, worth $45 million, and completely free to write my own story. Some people might say I should feel guilty about what I had done to Grace and Leo. Some people might say that revenge was beneath me. But I had learned something important. The only person whose opinion of me truly mattered was my own. And I was very, very pleased with the man I had become. As I prepared for bed, in my beautiful house, in my beautiful life. I thought about the book that had started this journey. Reclaiming Your Peace. After pain times had taught me that healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like justice. Sometimes it looks like standing up for yourself. Sometimes it looks like refusing to be anyone other than exactly who you are. I had reclaimed my peace. I had released my pain, and I had become, finally and completely, the king of my own castle. 2 years later, my book, The Silent Will, a guide to reclaiming your power after betrayal, hit the New York Times bestseller list. It stayed there for 16 weeks. I was not surprised. The book tour was a revelation. In city after city, I met men who had been dismissed, overlooked, made to feel invisible by families who saw them as burdens rather than as treasures. They came to my readings with tears in their eyes and a new fire in their hearts, ready to reclaim their own power. "You gave me permission to be angry," one man told me in Chicago. He was probably 70, with silver hair and hands marked by decades of caring for others. "My son-in-law has been stealing from me for years, and I kept telling myself that family peace was more important than justice. Your book taught me that sometimes justice times is times peace." "You showed me that I'm not crazy," said another in Seattle. "My daughter's husband has been gaslighting me for 5 years, making me think I'm difficult and demanding for wanting basic respect. Reading your story helped me see that the problem isn't me." But the most meaningful encounter came in Phoenix, where I had scheduled a reading against Matthew's advice. He thought it was too close to grace, too risky for unexpected encounters. I went anyway. The bookstore was packed, standing room only, with men of all ages clutching copies of my book like lifelines. I read from chapter 7, the section about teaching consequences to people who believe that love means unlimited tolerance for poor behavior. During the question and answer period, a young man raised his hand. He was probably 30, with tired eyes and the cautious posture of someone who had learned to make himself small. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "what do you say to people who think your approach was too harsh, who say that family is family, and you should forgive no matter what?" I considered the question carefully. This was the criticism I heard most often, that I had been too unforgiving, too calculating, too cold. "I would say," I replied, "that forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. It's something you give freely, not something that can be demanded or expected." I looked around the room at all those faces, seeing my own journey reflected in their eyes. I would also say that there is a difference between forgiveness and enabling. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the full weight of their own choices. "But don't you feel guilty?" he pressed. "They're living such difficult lives now. They are living the lives they chose," I corrected gently. "I did not make Grace weak or Leo cruel. I did not make them dismiss me or humiliate me or try to steal from me. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own actions." After the reading, as I was signing books, a woman approached my table. I looked up and found myself staring into familiar blue eyes, Grace's eyes, but in a face I didn't recognize. "Mr. Whitmore?" Her voice was uncertain. "I'm Dana Chan, Grace's physical therapist. We spoke on the phone once." I set down my pen and studied her. She was younger than I had expected, with kind eyes and the gentle manner of someone who spends their life helping people heal. "Miss Chen, this is unexpected. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you, actually." "Thank me?" "For the letter you sent, and for what you did for Grace." She glanced around the busy bookstore, then leaned a little closer. "You probably saved her life." I felt a flicker of surprise. I'm not sure I understand. Grace was broken when she first came to Phoenix, she explained. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She had no sense of her own worth, no ability to stand up for herself, no understanding of how to build a life based on her own choices rather than other people's expectations. Dana's voice was quiet but intense. The consequences you gave her, the financial loss, the social rejection, the complete removal of her safety net, they forced her to become a real person. And how is she? I asked, though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to know. She's good, really good. She has a small apartment that she keeps meticulously clean. She works for a company that builds affordable housing, and she's proud of the work she does. She's learned to cook, to manage her money, to take care of herself. Dana smiled. Most importantly, she's learned to stand up for what's right. Last month, she reported a safety violation at work that could have gotten her fired. She did it anyway, because it was the right thing to do. I felt something shift in my chest, some small knot of long-held tension finally releasing. I'm glad she's found her way. She wanted me to tell you something. If I ever had the chance to meet you, she said to tell you that she's learned the difference between being a daughter and being a woman, and that you taught her which one was more important. I looked around the bookstore at all the men who had come to hear about reclaiming power, about refusing to be victims, about writing their own endings. These men who, like me, had been told they were too old, too difficult, too demanding. Miss Chen, I said, please tell Grace that I hope she continues to build good windows. Windows? She'll understand. After Dana left, I continued signing books, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about the man I had been 3 years ago, devastated by loss, humiliated by cruelty, made to feel worthless by the people who should have cherished me. I thought about the man I had become, powerful, independent, complete in myself. The transformation had not been easy. It had required letting go of my illusions about family love and unconditional acceptance. It had required facing the truth about Grace's weakness and Leo's cruelty. It had required using my resources in ways that felt foreign to a man raised to be accommodating and self-sacrificing. But it had been worth it. Every difficult decision, every calculated move, every moment of choosing justice over peace had led me to this. A life of my own choosing, a voice that mattered, a story that helped other men find their own strength. The last man in line was elderly, probably in his 80s, with a walker and the fragile dignity of a lifetime spent making do with less than he deserved. Mr. Whitmore, he said as I signed his book, I wanted to tell you that your story gave my grandson the courage to leave his abusive marriage. I looked up from the book, moved by the tears welling in his eyes. He'd been making excuses for him for years, telling himself that love meant accepting anything. Then he read your book and realized that love actually means expecting better. The old man's smile was watery but genuine. He filed for divorce last month. He's scared, but he's free. I handed him the signed book and covered his weathered hand with my own. Tell him that being scared and being strong are not opposites. Sometimes they are the very same thing. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the Phoenix skyline, I opened my laptop and began to write my next book, not about revenge or consequences, but about the life that comes after you have reclaimed your power. About the joy of waking up each morning knowing that you answer to no one but yourself. About the deep satisfaction of using your resources, financial, intellectual, social, to make the world a little better for men who have been told they don't matter. I wrote about the foundation I had started, quietly and without fanfare, that provided legal assistance to men facing family financial abuse, about the scholarship fund for men over 50 who were returning to school, about the network of attorneys and financial advisors who now specialized in helping older men protect themselves from family members who saw them as resources rather than as people. I wrote about the garden I had planted where Leo's gaudy flower bed used to be, and how the vegetables I grew with my own 2 hands tasted better than anything money could buy. I wrote about the watercolor classes I taught at the senior center, showing other men that it was never too late to discover new talents. I wrote about the book club I hosted monthly, where men gathered to discuss stories of strength and transformation. I wrote about Matthew, who had become not just my attorney but my dearest friend, and how we traveled together to the places we had always wanted to see. I wrote about the quiet evenings in my beautiful house, reading by the fire, completely at peace in my own company. Most of all, I wrote about the unexpected gift of starting over at 63. How losing everything I thought had defined me, my role as a husband, as a father, as the keeper of family peace, had allowed me to discover who I really was underneath all those titles. I was Walter Whitmore, and I was magnificent. As I wrote late into the night, my phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. "How did the Phoenix reading go?" "Perfectly," I typed back. "I think I'm ready to write the sequel." "What's the sequel about?" I looked out at the desert city where my daughter was learning to build better windows, where she was discovering what it meant to be a woman rather than just someone's child. I thought about the cycle of consequences and redemption, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's weakness. "It's about what happens after you've won," I typed. "About building a life so beautiful that you're grateful for everything that led you to it. Even the painful parts. Especially the painful parts." I set down the phone and returned to my writing, crafting the words that would help other men understand what I had learned. That age is not weakness, that silence is not submission, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be anyone other than exactly who you are. Outside my window, Phoenix glittered in the desert darkness, full of people learning to start over, learning to build better lives from the ashes of their mistakes. Tomorrow, I would fly home, to my beautiful house and my beautiful life. But tonight, I was content to sit in this anonymous hotel room and write the words that would outlive me. I was 65 years old, worth $48 million, and the author of a best-selling book that was changing men's lives across the country. But more than any of that, I was free. Free to write my own story. Free to demand respect. Free to use my power in service of my own values. Free to be magnificent. And that, I thought, as I continued writing into the desert night, was the greatest victory of all. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.